Chapter 1: Asset Integrity. The air in the cab of Mac Ferris's rig tasted of stale coffee and cold vinyl. Outside, a pale sun did nothing to warm the sprawling, gravel-strewn yard of the Yellowknife Depot. 12 rigs, all identical Peterbilts painted a flat, non-reflective gray, sat in a perfect line. Their engines were silent. The quiet was heavy, unnatural for a place built on the roar of diesel. Mac finished his pre-trip inspection, his movements economical, ingrained from years in Army logistics. He ran a gloved hand over the fifth wheel coupling, checking the kingpin lock. Solid. He thumped each of the 18 tires with a small hammer, the clean thwack a familiar sound in the oppressive silence. He was methodical because procedure was a shield against chaos. He needed this run to go smoothly. The bank notices on his kitchen table were a constant, quiet scream. A heavy grunt came from the rig next to his. A large man with a thick gray beard and a stomach that strained the fabric of a faded flannel shirt dropped to the ground. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "She's as good as she's gonna get," the man said, his voice a low rumble. He squinted at Mac. "You're Ferris." It was a statement, not a question. Mac gave a short nod. "And you're Brecher." "Grum," the big man corrected. He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the frozen gravel. "They still call me Grum. This is my last one. Pensions paid up. One more haul to pay for a boat." "Good for you," Max said, his own voice flat. He had no room for other people's retirements. He had a mortgage and a different kind of debt, one that could not be paid with money. Grum leaned against his front tire, his gaze sweeping over the silent convoy. 12 apostles off to see God. Don't you find it strange? The whole setup. "It's a job," Mac countered, his focus on rechecking the seals on his trailer. The container was a standard 40-foot reefer, but there were modifications. Heavy-duty locks he didn't recognize, reinforced steel panels welded over the standard doors. No company logos. Nothing. "A job, right," Grum chuckled, a humorless sound. "You ever haul for Panopticon before?" Mac shook his head. "They pay triple the rate for a reason, son, and it ain't the cold." Grum lowered his voice, though no one else was within earshot. "They got rules. You follow 'em, all of 'em, especially the one about the radio. You hear something on the open channels, something odd, you turn it off. You stick to company comms, nothing else." "I read the contract," Max said. "Reading it and living it are two different things." Grum pushed himself off the tire. "The ice gets what it wants, always has. Some runs it wants a tire. Some runs it wants a whole rig. These Panopticon runs, the ice gets hungry." Before Mac could respond, a sharp electronic tone cut through the air, emitted from speakers mounted on tall poles around the yard. Every driver paused. They turned toward a large screen mounted on the main depot building. It flickered to life, showing a grainy, black-and-white image of a man in a sharp suit. The man's face was narrow, his eyes dark pools. He did not blink. A voice, smooth and androgynous, came from the speakers. It was not the man's voice. It was something else, impossibly clear and calm. "Good morning, logistical assets. This is your dispatcher, Panopticon. Welcome to Operation White Road. Your contracts are active. Your obligations are clear. The camera on the screen did not move. The man in the suit was a statue. Your cargo has been secured, the voice continued. Your single objective is delivery to Dead Reckoning Point. Your manifest is simple: maintain asset integrity, your own and your cargo's. The convoy will maintain a speed of 45 kilometers per hour. You will maintain a distance of 200 meters between vehicles. Channel 1 is for official communication only. All other radio use is prohibited. Stopping is prohibited. Overtaking is prohibited. Rendering assistance to another asset is prohibited. A beat of silence hung in the frigid air. Violation of these protocols will result in contract termination. There are no exceptions. The lead truck, Asset 1, will depart in 5 minutes. Acknowledge protocol understanding in sequence. A series of clicks came over the external speakers as each driver keyed their cab radio. Asset 1 acknowledged. Asset 2 acknowledged. Grum caught Mac's eye. The big man's face was grim. He gave a tiny shake of his head before climbing into his cab. Mac was Asset 4. Grum was Asset 3. Asset 3 acknowledged. Mac swung himself up into his own rig. The air inside was his. He closed the door, sealing out the world. He keyed the mic. Asset 4 acknowledged. He continued down the line, listening to the disembodied voices of the men and women he would spend the next 3 days with but never meet. Asset 7, a woman, sounded young. Asset 10 had a thick Eastern European accent. Asset 12 acknowledged. The voice of Panopticon returned. Excellent. Operation White Road is now active. Good hauling. The screen went black. A low, powerful rumble began as the driver of Asset 1 started his engine. One by one, the other engines followed, a synchronized roar that vibrated deep in Mac's chest. The sound was a relief, a mask for the unsettling quiet. He put the truck in gear. The gate at the far end of the yard began to slide open, revealing the start of the ice road, a white scar disappearing into an endless expanse of white. Asset 1 pulled forward. 200 meters behind, Asset 2 followed. Then Grum. Mac took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. He let the clutch out. His truck, his cargo, his entire world lurched forward. He was a link in a chain, heading north into the great, empty nothing. Chapter 2: The Long Silence. The world became a study in white and gray. The sky was a sheet of dirty cotton. The ground was a vast, frozen lake covered in wind-swept snow. The road itself was a track of compacted ice, a darker gray against the brilliant white of the landscape. Mac's world shrank to the dimensions of his cab and the 2 red lights of Grum's trailer 200 meters ahead. Hours bled into one another. The drone of the engine was a constant companion, a low hum that vibrated through the seat, up his spine, and into the base of his skull. The only other sound was the crunch of the tires on the ice and the hiss of the cab's heater. It was a hypnotic rhythm, a lullaby for the insane. He drove with practiced ease, his hands light on the wheel, making small corrections as the rig drifted on the uneven ice. He watched his gauges. Temperature, oil pressure, turbo boost, all normal. He checked the separate monitor for the reefer unit on the trailer. It was set to -20 degrees Celsius. The display glowed a steady, reassuring green. Asset integrity. A single, sharp crackle came from the radio. Panopticon to all assets. Weather update. A low-pressure system is moving in from the west. Expect reduced visibility within the next 6 hours. Maintain speed and distance. Panopticon out. The voice was as sterile as before. It offered information without comfort. Mac glanced at the CB radio mounted below the dash, its power light off. Grum's warning echoed in his mind. You hear something odd. You turn it off. What constituted odd out here? The place was built on odd. His hand twitched, wanting to flick the switch. To hear a human voice. A joke. A complaint about the cold. Anything to break the crushing monotony. He resisted. This was a job. A weird job, a dangerous job, but the pay at the end would solve problems he couldn't afford to have for another month. He ate a cold protein bar, washing it down with water from a bottle. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in weak shades of orange and pink. The world outside the beam of his headlights turned a deep, menacing blue. The red lights of Grum's trailer were a constant, a beacon, a promise he was not entirely alone. Another hour passed. The beauty of the sunset faded into an impenetrable darkness. It was just his headlights cutting a tunnel through the night and the snow, which had begun to fall in lazy, drifting flakes. The CB crackled to life. Mac's hand shot to the power button, ready to kill it, but he hesitated. "For you there. Come on, Ferris, I'm going stir-crazy over here." It was Grum. His voice was a low whisper, a flagrant violation of the primary rule. Mac's jaw tightened. Answering was a breach of contract, but ignoring the only other human he'd had contact with for a day. He lifted the receiver, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. "Just a quick word," Grum's voice came again, tinny and strained. "This stretch ahead. The locals call it the Skeleton Coast, not the one in Africa, ours. The wind gets mean, plays tricks. You see something, Ferris, you keep your eyes on my tail lights. You understand, don't get drawn in by the scenery." Mac pressed the button for a fraction of a second. Understood. "Good man," a sigh of relief. "This quiet, it ain't right. None of this is right. My last run. Should have been hauling lumber to Edmonton, not whatever this is." Suddenly, the main radio burst to life with the dispatcher's voice, sharp and cold. "Asset 3, you are in violation of communication protocols. Maintain radio silence. This is your only warning." The CB went dead. Grum had cut his power. Mac's heart hammered against his ribs. They were listening. Not just monitoring the channel, but listening with an impossible omniscience. A cold dread, colder than the air outside, seeped into the cab. He was being watched. They all were. He focused on the 2 red lights ahead. They were his compass, his reality. As long as they were there, the world made a certain kind of sense. The snow began to fall harder, thicker. The wind picked up, howling around the cab, rocking the massive vehicle. Visibility dropped. The 2 red lights became hazy, blurred. Sometimes they disappeared completely for a second or two behind a thick curtain of blowing snow. Mac leaned forward, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes straining. The 200 meters between them felt like a mile. Then he saw it. To the right of the road, far out on the ice, a single light flickered. It was a warm, yellow light. A lantern, maybe. It appeared and vanished in the swirling snow. A trick of the light. A hallucination brought on by fatigue and the hypnotic dance of the snowflakes. He kept his eyes locked on where Grum's truck should be. The red lights reappeared, steady for a moment. He allowed himself a short breath. The yellow light appeared again, closer this time. It looked like someone was holding it, waving it slowly from side to side. An invitation, a plea. Don't get drawn in by the scenery. Mac's mouth was dry. He kept driving. The truck felt like a fragile shell. The howl of the wind rose to a shriek. For a terrifying moment, the wind and the engine and the snow blended into a single, overwhelming sensory assault. He blinked, and the road ahead was empty. Grum's taillights were gone. Not hazy, not obscured, gone. Mac's foot hovered over the brake. Stopping is prohibited. He stared into the blizzard, his headlights catching nothing but a wall of white. 200 meters, 45 kilometers an hour. Grum couldn't have vanished. The radio crackled. It was Panopticon. All assets, be advised. Asset 3 has experienced a vehicle malfunction and is no longer part of the convoy. Reduce speed to 30 kilometers per hour. Maintain position. Acknowledge. Mac's blood ran cold. A malfunction. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. Asset 1 acknowledged. The voice from the lead truck was tight. Asset 2 acknowledged. It was Mac's turn. He stared at the empty space where Grum should be. The ice gets what it wants. He picked up the receiver. His hand was shaking. Asset 4, he said, his voice hoarse. Acknowledged. He drove on, into the space where his only companion had been moments before. His headlights revealing nothing but fresh snow on an unbroken road. Chapter 3, Truck 7. The loss of Grum's truck changed the texture of the journey. The empty space ahead of Mac was a void, a constant reminder of the fragility of their procession. The convoy felt smaller, more vulnerable. The two red lights he now followed belonged to Asset 2, a stranger. The buffer was gone. He was on the front line of whatever came next. The blizzard subsided with the dawn, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and blindingly bright. The sun on the fresh snow was painful to behold. Mac kept his visor down, his eyes gritty from a sleepless night. He had driven on autopilot, his mind replaying the disappearance of Grum's lights, the cold, clinical announcement from Panopticon. A vehicle malfunction. A neat, tidy lie to paper over a terrifying truth. He risked a glance at the CB. It remained off, a dead object. He wondered if anyone else would dare to break the silence now. He doubted it. Fear was a more effective warden than any dispatcher. The day wore on in a procession of silent, tense hours. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through the doors, chilling the glass. He kept the heater on full blast, but it only seemed to warm a small bubble of air around him. The rest of the cab was a cold tomb. Panopticon's voice came at regular intervals, weather updates, check-ins. Each time the roll call was a little more strained. Asset 1 acknowledge. Asset 2 acknowledged. Asset 4 acknowledged. The missing number 3 was a hole in the sequence, a silent testament to the night's events. It was mid-afternoon when the routine shattered again. Far ahead past Asset 2, Max saw the lights of another truck begin to behave erratically. It was Asset 7, the one with the young woman's voice. Her brake lights flashed intermittently with no rhythm. The truck swerved slightly, correcting, then swerving again, its movements jerky and uncertain. Mac watched, his stomach twisting into a cold knot. It was happening again. He saw the rig of Asset 2 slow slightly, the driver ahead of him obviously seeing the same thing. The 200-meter gap began to shrink. The radio crackled, but it wasn't Panopticon. Help something in the static can't. It was her, the driver of Asset 7. Her voice was thin, laced with pure panic. The transmission was a mess of static and clipped words, as if she were fighting for control of the radio itself. In the box, oh God, it's cold. Then a sound came through the speaker that made the hair on Mac's arm stand on end. It was a low, resonant thrum, a deep vibration that seemed to warp the very fabric of the broadcast. It was not a mechanical sound. It was deep and organic and utterly alien. Asset 7, the voice of Panopticon cut in, sharp as a shard of ice. Maintain communication protocol. Cease unauthorized broadcast immediately. It's coming out, she shrieked, her voice crystal clear for a moment, a spike of pure terror. It's... Her microphone went dead. Mac watched, a helpless spectator. Asset 7's truck swerved violently to the right. It didn't slow, it didn't jackknife. It accelerated, plowing off the compacted ice of the road and onto the deep, virgin snow of the open lake. It carved a great white plume in its wake, a massive machine completely out of control. It drove for 100 yards, then 200, a gray projectile against a white canvas. It did not crash. It did not flip. It simply drove out into the vast emptiness until it was a tiny gray speck, and then it was gone, swallowed by the horizon. There was a moment of absolute silence on the radio. No one dared to speak. Mac could see the truck ahead of him, Asset 2, had slowed almost to a stop, its driver surely paralyzed by the same horror. Panopticon's voice returned, as calm and unruffled as if it were announcing the time. All assets. Asset 7 has deviated from the designated route. Her contract is terminated. Maintain speed and position. Do not deviate. Do not stop. The command was absolute. They were to drive past the point where she had vanished, to pretend it had not happened, to erase another driver, another human being from their reality. Mac drove on, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. His gaze was fixed on the tracks Asset 7 had left, a deep gouge in the snow leading to nowhere. As he drew level with them, he slowed, a direct violation of the order, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was nothing, no smoke, no wreck, just an endless, empty plain of white. He looked at the reefer unit on his own trailer, at the heavy, modified locks. He saw the small, green light of the temperature display. -20 degrees. Asset integrity. What was he hauling? What were they all hauling? The thrumming sound he had heard over the radio echoed in his memory. It wasn't just a broadcast artifact. It was the sound of the cargo. A cold, deep dread settled in his gut. The threat wasn't just on the ice. The threat wasn't just the company that had sent them here. He was locked in a small metal box with it. He pushed the accelerator, the engine groaning in protest as he brought the rig back up to speed. He had to get to dead reckoning point. He had to get this thing off his truck. It was no longer about the money. It was about survival. He was a man carrying a bomb, and he was beginning to hear the tick. Chapter 4: The Song of Static. Night fell again, a thick, starless blanket. The convoy was smaller. The gaps between the lights were wider, the darkness between them deeper. Mac drove in a state of hyper-awareness. Every flicker of a shadow, every moan of the wind, every creak of his truck was a potential threat. Sleep was a distant country he had no passport for. The silence on the radio was absolute. Panopticon had not spoken since the loss of Asset 7. The quiet was a living thing, pressing in on the cab, suffocating him. He found himself holding his breath, listening. Listening for what, he did not know. And then he heard it. It started subtly at the edge of his hearing. A faint hiss in the speakers of the company radio, which should have been silent. He thought it was an atmospheric anomaly, some quirk of the polar magnetosphere. He tried to ignore it. But it grew. It was not the random sizzle of empty airwaves. It had a pattern, a rhythm. It was a low, undulating wash of static that rose and fell with a strange, mournful cadence. It sounded, bizarrely, like a choir humming from a vast distance, its voices filtered through 1,000 miles of sand. He reached for the volume knob, but his hand stopped. Grum's voice came to him. "You hear something odd." This was odd. This was deeply, profoundly wrong. The sound grew in complexity. Within the waves of static, he began to discern faint, thread-like melodies. They were discordant, full of microtones and impossible shifts in pitch. They seemed to scrape at the inside of his skull. He felt a pressure building behind his eyes. He had to turn it off. He had to. His fingers closed around the volume knob, but a new sound froze him in place. A voice. It was faint, buried deep within the static, but it was unmistakably Grum. "So cold, the ice, it sings." The voice was distorted, stretched, as if it were being played at the wrong speed. It was followed by a high, thin wail that sounded like the woman from Asset 7. It was a chorus of the lost, the song of the damned. Mac's blood turned to ice water. This wasn't a broadcast. It was a haunting. The radio had become a conduit for the spirits of the road, for the drivers this convoy had already consumed. He slapped the power button on the radio, plunging the cab into blessed mechanical silence. The drone of the engine and the heater fan rushed back in, familiar and safe. But the song lingered in his mind, a phantom echo. He drove for what might have been an hour, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning holes in the darkness ahead. He tried to focus on the road, on the taillights of Asset 2. But the silence he had craved now felt thin, a fragile membrane stretched over a cacophony of ghosts. His hand trembled as he reached for the CB radio. He needed to know if he was insane. He needed to know if anyone else heard it. Breaking protocol was a risk. Remaining alone with this horror was a certainty. He flicked the power switch. The CB hissed to life. Anyone on this channel, a voice crackled. It was Sloan, the cynic from the depot, the driver of Asset 6. His voice was ragged with panic. Do you hear it? Do you hear the goddamn singing? Relief washed over Mac, so potent it almost made him dizzy. He was not alone. He was not crazy. Before he could answer, another voice broke in, thick with a Slavic accent. Nikolai, Asset 10, is ghosts, ghosts of the road, we must pray. Pray, Sloan shot back, his voice cracking. Prayer ain't gonna help us. What is in these containers? What are we carrying? Mac grabbed his receiver. Sloan, Nikolai, this is Ferris. Asset 4, I hear it too. It started about an hour ago. Ferris, Sloan said, his relief palpable. What do we do? We're sitting ducks out here. We're being picked off one by one. The company radio on Mac's dash suddenly switched itself on. The volume was deafening. The song of static filled the cab, 1,000 ghostly voices shrieking in a discordant symphony. It was an overwhelming wall of sound, pure psychic violence. Mac yelled, clapping his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside his head, vibrating in his bones. Through the chaos, the voice of Panopticon sliced through, impossibly loud and clear. Asset 4, Asset 6, Asset 10, cease all unauthorized communication. Contract violation is registered. Final warning. As suddenly as it began, the sound cut out. The company radio switched off. Silence returned, heavy and menacing. The CB crackled. What the hell was that? Sloan whispered. And then a new sound joined the conversation. It came from Sloan's open mic, a sharp, percussive crack like a rock hitting a windshield. What was that? Mac demanded. Sloan, report. There was no answer, only the sound of Sloan's breathing, harsh and panicked. Then another sound, a slow, heavy scrape, the sound of metal on metal. It was coming from outside Sloan's truck. Something on my rig, Sloan hissed. It's on the cab. What is it? Mac asked, his eyes straining, trying to see past the few trucks between them. I can't see, it's on the roof. A pause, a sharp intake of breath. Oh God, the windshield, it's cracking. Mac could hear it over the radio, a spiderweb of thin, sharp pops. Sloan, get out of there, drive, shake it off, Mac yelled. It's too heavy, the truck is. Sloan's transmission ended in a horrific, wet crunch of collapsing metal and a short, choked scream. The microphone stayed open. For a few terrible seconds, the only sound was the hiss of the empty channel and a slow, rhythmic, liquid dripping. Then silence. Mac stared at his CB, his hand frozen on the receiver. He was alone again, more alone than before. He looked at his own windshield, half expecting to see a shape descend from the roof. The company radio clicked on. All assets, be advised. Asset 6 is no longer part of the convoy. Maintain formation. panopticon out. The cold, procedural announcement was the most horrifying sound of all. It was the sound of utter indifference. They were not drivers, they were not people, they were assets, expendable, and something was methodically, patiently removing them from the equation. The song was not just a haunting, it was a lure, a weapon, a prelude to the arrival of the monster. Chapter 5: Vibrations. The convoy drove on, a wounded animal shedding its limbs one by one as it limped through the Arctic desert. Mac counted the lights ahead of him. There were fewer now. The gaps were vast oceans of darkness. He was Asset 4, but he was moving up the line, a promotion no one wanted. He fought to stay awake, his body screaming for rest, his mind a hive of terror. He mainlined coffee from a thermos, the hot, bitter liquid a poor substitute for sleep, but it kept his eyes open. He had turned off all the radios. The silence was his armor now. He would not be lured in by phantom voices. He would not listen to the death of another driver. It was in this self-imposed quiet that he first noticed the new sound. It was not a sound from outside. It was not the wind or the ice or the engine. It came from behind him, from the trailer. It was a low, intermittent thump. At first he dismissed it as the load shifting, but the cargo was supposed to be secured, and the thumps were too regular, too rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. It was like a giant, irregular heartbeat. He turned the heater fan down, straining to hear over the engine's drone. There it was again, a soft, heavy impact against the inside of the container's front wall, just feet behind his head. Thump. His blood ran cold. The woman from Asset 7, the box, it's coming out. He thought of the reefer unit, its light a steady green. -20 degrees. What could live in that? What could move? The thumping became more insistent. Thump, 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 thump. It was faster now, less random. It sounded like something testing its cage, something waking up. He drove for another hour, the sound a constant, terrifying companion. His skin crawled. Every thump was a physical blow, a reminder of the unknown horror he was hauling. He had to see. He had to know. A pinpoint of light appeared on the horizon. The halfway station. A mandatory 30-minute stop for refueling and inspection. It was their first scheduled stop since leaving the depot. A small island of light and supposed safety in the endless night. As he pulled into the brightly lit yard, he saw them. Two figures dressed in immaculate white Arctic gear, their faces obscured by goggles and masks. The observers. They stood motionless, holding data pads as the trucks rolled in. They did not offer greetings. They did not direct traffic. They just watched. Mac brought his rig to a halt beside a fuel pump. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the station's generator and the relentless wind. The thumping from his trailer stopped. He had 30 minutes. He swung out of the cab, his legs stiff. The cold hit him like a fist. He began the refueling process on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. He kept glancing at his trailer, then at the two silent observers who were watching him, their heads tilted slightly. Fueling done, he grabbed a heavy maglite from his cab. He had to know. He started a slow walk around the trailer, feigning an inspection. He ran his light over the tires, the chassis, the reefer unit. Everything looked normal. The green light glowed. He reached the back of the container. The heavy, modified doors were sealed tight. He saw scratch marks on the metal around the locks, but they could have been from loading. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. Nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigeration unit. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe the fatigue, the fear, the song of static, maybe it had all finally broken his mind. He walked along the side of the container, back towards the cab. He ran his gloved hand along the cold, corrugated metal wall. And then he felt it. A vibration. It was deep and low, traveling through the metal into his palm. It was not the shudder of machinery. It was organic. It was the same resonant thrum he had heard over the radio just before Asset 7 disappeared. He snatched his hand away as if burned. The thing inside was not just moving. It was resonating. It was humming. It was alive. His eyes darted to the observers. They were both staring directly at him. They had not moved, but he could feel the intensity of their gaze. They knew. Of course they knew. This was not a delivery. It was an incubation. The constant vibration of the road, the engine, the journey itself, it was part of the process. They were waking these things up. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He had to get away from the container. He had to get away from the truck. He started to step away, but a movement from the next truck over caught his eye. It was Asset 5, the rig that had been behind Sloan. The driver was getting out of his cab, but he moved strangely. His motions were too fluid, too fast. He dropped from the cab to the ground in a single, silent motion that was not human. The driver, a tall, thin man, turned. His face was pale, his eyes wide and staring, but there was a horrifying emptiness to them. He started walking, not toward the depot building, but toward the truck of Asset 2, which was parked nearby. Mac watched, frozen in place. The driver of Asset 2 was outside, checking his tires, his back to the approaching figure. "Hey," Mac shouted, his voice a raw croak. "Asset 2." The driver looked up, confused. He saw the approaching man and offered a tentative wave. The man from Asset 5 did not wave back. He broke into a run, his legs pumping with an unnatural, jarring rhythm. He covered the 50 feet between the trucks in seconds. The driver of Asset 2 had no time to react. The thin man slammed into him, and Mac heard a sickening crunch of bone. There was no fight. There was no struggle. The thin man lifted the driver of Asset 2 by the throat, a man twice his size, and threw him against the side of his own truck with impossible strength. Then he unhinged his jaw. It was not a metaphor. His jaw split open, wider and wider, revealing not teeth and a tongue, but a black, hollow cavity from which a high-pitched, sonic shriek erupted. The shriek shattered the windows of Asset 2's cab. The thin man was no longer a man. He was an unman, a shell, a host. The cargo had gotten out. Max stared in pure, unadulterated horror. The two observers had not moved. They were watching the spectacle, their data pads raised as if they were recording data, documenting the result of their monstrous experiment. Max scrambled into his cab, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking violently. He had to leave. He had to leave now. The 30-minute stop was a lie. It was a chance for the infection to spread. He cranked the engine. It roared to life. He slammed the truck into gear, ignoring the observers, ignoring the horror unfolding in his mirror. He floored the accelerator, his tires spitting gravel and ice as the rig lurched forward, away from the light, away from the screaming, and back into the all-consuming darkness of the white road. Chapter 6: The Judas Rig. Mac drove with the fury of a man possessed. He pushed the truck harder than he ever had, the engine screaming in protest as the speedometer needle climbed past the mandated limit. The halfway station, a single point of light, vanished in his rearview mirror, swallowed by the oppressive dark. He was alone again, but now the solitude was a blessing. The convoy was not a team. It was a plague ship, and he was desperate to escape it. The image of the unman was burned into his retinas. The unnatural speed, the impossible strength, the gaping, shrieking maw. It was the monster from the container, wearing a human suit. Sloane's truck hadn't been attacked from the outside. It had been breached from the inside. The driver of Asset 5 hadn't been a victim. He was a weapon. A chilling realization washed over him. This wasn't just a delivery of horrors. It was a filtration process. The weak, the unlucky, the ones whose cargo awakened too soon, they were culled. The convoy was designed to deliver not just the cargo, but a tested, proven specimen, or a driver strong enough or lucky enough to survive the incubation. He eased his foot off the accelerator, letting the speed drop back to something manageable. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Panic made mistakes. He needed his wits. He was still hauling one of the things. The thumping and the low-frequency hum from his trailer had returned with the motion of the road, a constant, terrifying reminder of his passenger. He had to assume his own countdown had started. He forced himself into a state of cold, analytical calm, the way his drill sergeant had taught him years ago. Assess the threat, identify resources, formulate a plan. The threat was twofold: the creature in his trailer and the architects of this nightmare panopticon. His resources were his truck, his wits, and whatever was left in his thermos. The plan was non-existent. His only objective had been to reach dead reckoning point. Now, that destination sounded less like a place on a map and more like a final judgment. He checked his mirrors. Far behind him, a set of headlights pierced the darkness. One of the other trucks from the convoy keeping pace. He counted the rigs still ahead of him, Asset 1 and Asset 2. He was the third truck in line now. The convoy was shrinking, tightening. The voice of Panopticon crackled over the radio, startling him. It was as calm as ever, a chilling counterpoint to the carnage at the station. All assets. The scheduled stop is complete. Proceed to the final waypoint. Maintain formation. Asset 5 has been decommissioned. Decommissioned. A sterile word for a horrifying transformation. Mac's eyes flickered to the mirror again. The headlights behind him were perfectly steady, too steady. They maintained their distance with electronic precision, never wavering, never drifting. Human drivers weren't that perfect. The cold dread returned, intensified. The truck behind him. What if it wasn't just another driver? What if it was a shepherd, a wolf watching the flock? The idea took root in his mind, a seed of pure paranoia. The convoy wasn't just being culled by accident. It was being actively managed. One of the trucks was a Judas rig, a predator disguised as prey, crewed by something that only wore a human face. Its job was to clean up the failures, to ensure the experiment stayed on track, to herd the remaining survivors to their destination. He watched the headlights. They were relentless. He sped up. They sped up. He slowed down. They slowed down. He was being shadowed. He had to test the theory. He had to know. Ahead, the ice road forked. The main route, the one on his GPS, went straight. A smaller, unmarked track veered off to the left, a path used by local trappers according to the old maps he'd studied. It was more treacherous, less maintained. It was a risk, but it was a deviation. He waited until the last possible second. The GPS blared a warning, off route, correct course immediately. He ignored it. At the fork, he wrenched the wheel to the left, his tires groaning as they left the smooth ice of the main road for the rough, uncertain track. The truck shuddered, the vibration from the engine changing pitch. He looked in his mirror. For a moment, the headlights behind him continued straight. A wave of relief washed over him. He was wrong. It was just another terrified driver. Then the headlights braked hard, turning with impossible speed, and swung onto the side track after him. The Judas rig. It was real. He was being hunted. The chase was on. The narrow track was a nightmare. The ice was fractured, riddled with pressure ridges that threatened to tear the tires from their rims. Mac fought the wheel, his arms burning, his focus absolute. He was no longer a trucker. He was a soldier, evading an enemy in hostile territory. The headlights of the Judas rig grew larger in his mirrors. It was faster, its driver, or whatever was at the wheel, unburdened by fear or self-preservation. It was gaining on him. He saw a long, steep grade ahead. If he could get some distance, maybe he could lose it on the other side. He pushed the engine, demanding every ounce of power. The truck clawed its way up the icy incline. The hum from his own trailer intensified, the thumping becoming a frantic, angry banging. The creature inside was awake and agitated by the violent motion. He crested the hill and his heart sank. The road ahead was a straight, flat expanse. There was nowhere to hide. The Judas rig crested the hill behind him, its headlights blindingly bright. It accelerated, closing the gap with terrifying speed. It was going to ram him. Mac's mind raced. He couldn't outrun it. He couldn't outfight it. He had to outthink it. His eyes scanned the terrain. To his right was a steep drop-off, a 50-foot cliff of jagged ice and rock leading down to the frozen riverbed. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. He waited until the Judas rig was almost on his bumper. He could hear its engine roaring over his own. He braced himself. At the last possible second, he slammed on his brakes and jackknifed the wheel to the right. His own rig screamed in protest. The trailer swung out violently, a massive 40-foot steel pendulum. It was a move that should have sent him spiraling into the abyss. But his target wasn't the abyss. The Judas rig had no time to react. It plowed directly into the side of Mac's swinging trailer. The sound was a cataclysmic explosion of tearing metal. The force of the impact was immense, throwing Mac against his seatbelt, the air driven from his lungs. The Judas rig, its front end completely demolished, was knocked sideways by the blow. It teetered on the edge of the cliff for a single, long second. Then, with a final, metallic groan, it plunged over the side, disappearing into the darkness. Mac fought for control of his own truck, the trailer fishtailing wildly. He steered into the skid, his tires finding a desperate purchase on the ice. The rig shuddered to a halt, parked sideways across the narrow road, its engine stalled, its headlights illuminating a cloud of steam and snow. He sat in the sudden, ringing silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He was alive. Then a new sound began. A loud, rhythmic bang, bang, bang. It came from his own trailer. It was not the sound of thumping. It was the sound of metal screaming as it was forced past its breaking point. The creature inside was trying to get out, and it was succeeding. Chapter 7: The Breach. The silence that followed the crash was a fragile skin stretched over chaos. Mac's ears rang. The smell of hot metal and diesel filled the cab. He stared at the spot where the Judas rig had vanished, half expecting it to crawl back up the cliff face. Nothing. Only the wind howling its mournful song. Bang, S-C-C-C-R-E-C-H, bang. The sound from his trailer ripped him from his trance. It was a sound of methodical destruction. He fumbled with the ignition, his shaking hands making the simple task a monumental effort. The engine turned, caught, and roared back to life. He had to move. He had to put distance between himself and whatever was about to be born from that steel container. He wrestled the truck straight, the gears grinding in protest. The rig was hurt. The impact had thrown something out of alignment. It pulled hard to the right and the trailer felt sluggish, a dead weight dragging behind him. But it moved. Bang, groan, pop. A sharp, metallic pop, like a giant rivet being sheared in two. Mac's eyes darted to his side mirror. He could see the container wall, illuminated by his own running lights. A section of the corrugated metal was bulging outward, the deformation growing with each new impact from within. The paint was flacking off, revealing the strain on the steel. He was driving a ticking bomb, and the countdown was in its final seconds. His GPS was a mess of red lines and error messages. Off route, no signal. He was lost, driving a damaged rig on an unmapped road with a monster tearing its way out of his cargo. The situation had progressed from dire to apocalyptic. He pushed the truck as fast as it would go, the frame shuddering, every bolt and weld protesting the abuse. The road was a blur of ice and shadow. He had no destination. His only direction was away. A deafening crack echoed through the air and the whole rig shuddered violently. He looked in the mirror again. One of the heavy, modified locks on the rear doors had shattered. The door itself was bent outward, hanging crookedly from its remaining hinge. A dark, vertical slit had opened. From the darkness within that slit he saw a glimmer. Something pale and wet slid into view, pressing against the opening. It was not a hand. It was a limb, long and multi-jointed like a crab's leg but fashioned from glistening, bone-white cartilage and dark, sinewy muscle. It probed the edge of the broken door, testing its strength. Mac yelled, an involuntary primal sound of terror. It was real, it was out. The limb retracted. A moment later, two more limbs, identical to the first, shot out from the opening. They braced themselves against the outside of the container, their sharp tips digging into the metal. They began to pull. The sound of groaning, tearing steel was unbearable. The opening widened. Mac could see movement in the darkness beyond, a writhing mass of pale limbs and something that glistened like wet, black chitin. He had to get it off his truck. He swerved violently, trying to shake the trailer to throw the emerging creature off balance. The rig screamed and fishtailed, but the creature held on. The banging from inside stopped. It was all external now. It was climbing. He saw a shape in his mirror, a horrifying silhouette against the snow. The creature was pulling itself up onto the roof of the container. It was a gestalt of mismatched parts, a biomechanical nightmare. It had a crab-like lower body with multiple spindly legs, but its torso was vaguely humanoid, with a broad, armored carapace and two long, powerful arms ending in sharpened points. It had no discernible head, only a pulsating, fleshy mound where a neck should be. It crawled across the top of the container with insect-like speed, its legs finding purchase on the slick, icy metal. It was moving toward the cab. Mac's mind went blank with panic. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He was a bug in a can, and the monster was coming to open it. He looked around the cab, his eyes wild. His gaze fell on the heavy-duty fire extinguisher mounted beside his seat. It was a weak weapon against such a thing, but it was something. He ripped it from its bracket. The creature reached the front of the trailer. It paused, its featureless torso seeming to look down at the cab. Then it dropped. It landed on the roof of the cab with a deafening boom that cracked the windshield. The whole truck sagged under its weight. Mac screamed as spiderwebs of shattered glass erupted across his field of vision. He could hear it crawling on the roof directly above his head, the sound of its sharp legs scraping and gouging the metal. Scrape, scrape, clang. A new sound started, a high-pitched, whining drill. It was coming from the roof. The creature was boring its way in. This was it, the end. He was going to die here in the middle of nowhere, devoured by a thing from a box. Then a flicker of defiance sparked within him. The Army logistics specialist, the man who survived 2 tours, the man who refused to break. He would not die cowering. He looked at the road ahead. Through the fractured windshield he saw a shape, a massive pressure ridge, a wall of jagged, uplifted ice spanning the entire road, 10 feet high. A dead end. Or a tool. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles bleeding. He aimed the truck directly at the center of the ice wall. He floored the accelerator. The engine roared its final, defiant cry. The truck surged forward, a wounded beast on a suicide run. "Come on, you bastard," he screamed at the roof. "Come on." The drilling sound intensified. A small, dark hole appeared in the ceiling of the cab, metal peeling away from it. The ice wall loomed, a mountain of glittering destruction. 20 yards, 10 yards. Mac held his breath. He did not break. He did not swerve. He closed his eyes an instant before impact. The world exploded in a cataclysm of noise and violence. The front of the truck hit the ice wall with the force of a bomb. The sound of the crash was absolute, a physical thing that tore through the air. Mac was thrown forward, his body saved only by the straining seatbelt that felt like it was cutting him in two. The cab crumpled like a tin can. The momentum of the trailer, a massive, unyielding weight, drove it forward, telescoping the entire front end of the rig. The creature on the roof, caught completely by surprise, was pitched forward by the sudden, brutal deceleration. It was launched from the cab like a stone from a catapult, its horrifying form sailing through the air, over the ice wall, to smash into the jagged terrain on the other side. The world went black. Chapter 8: Dead Reckoning Point. Consciousness returned in painful, fragmented shards. The first thing Mac registered was the cold. It was a deep, invasive cold that had seeped into his bones. The second was the silence. The engine was dead. The wind was gone. There was only a profound, ringing quiet. He opened his eyes. The world was sideways. He was hanging from his seat belt, the cab of his truck crushed and twisted into a sculpture of ruin. The windshield was gone, and through the mangled opening he saw a sky filled with more stars than he had ever seen in his life. The air was still and razor-sharp. Pain flared in his ribs, his head, his left arm. He tasted blood. He took a shallow breath which sent a fresh wave of agony through his chest. Broken ribs, at least, maybe more. He had survived. He fumbled for the seatbelt release, his fingers numb and clumsy. It finally gave way and he dropped a few inches, landing in a heap on the passenger side door, which was now the floor. He lay there for a long moment, taking inventory. His left arm was useless, a firestorm of pain from shoulder to fingertips. His head throbbed in time with his pulse, but his legs worked. With a groan, he pushed himself up, using the wreckage of the dashboard for support. He crawled through the empty frame of the windshield and dropped onto the snow. The cold was shocking, a physical blow. His jacket was torn. He was losing heat fast. He looked at the wreckage. His truck was totaled, a monument to his desperation. The cab was destroyed. The trailer was a twisted wreck, its front end crumpled against the ice wall, its back end still attached but bent at an unnatural angle. The container was ripped open, a gaping hole revealing the empty, metallic space within. The creature was gone. He scanned the area, his heart pounding. He saw it, 50 yards away, lying in a heap on the other side of the pressure ridge. The container-borne gestalt. It was motionless, a tangle of pale limbs and dark carapace, broken and still against the snow. Was it dead? He had to be sure. He found the maglite in the snow, its beam miraculously still working. Clutching it in his good hand, he began the painful process of climbing the ice wall. Every movement sent daggers of pain through his body. He finally pulled himself over the top and slid down the other side. He approached the creature cautiously, the beam of his light trembling. It was shattered. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, the bone-white cartilage splintered. The carapace was cracked, leaking a thick black ichor that steamed in the cold. It was dead, truly dead. A wave of lightheadedness washed over him, a mixture of relief, pain, and exhaustion. He had won. He had survived. He stumbled back to the wreckage of his cab. He needed to find the emergency supplies, the first aid kit, the flare gun. He rummaged through the twisted metal, his movements slow and agonizing. He found the kit, a small plastic box. Inside, he found painkillers and bandages. He dry-swallowed 4 of the pills and did his best to bind his ribs, hissing in pain with every movement. It was then he heard it, the crackle of a radio. It was coming from the cab. He crawled back inside and found the company radio, its faceplate shattered but a single red light still glowing. A voice emerged from the speaker, distorted by the damage. It was Panopticon. SZ4 report, status. Max stared at the broken device. They were still watching, still listening. Asset 4, your contract, is not complete, the voice crackled. Final delivery is pending. A new coordinate blinked onto the shattered GPS screen. It was not a place. It was a bearing and a distance. Bearing 0, distance 10 kilometers, north. Proceed to dead reckoning point, the voice commanded. Fulfill your obligation. Max started to laugh. It was a raw, broken sound, half sob, half madness. His truck was destroyed. He was broken. The cargo was a dead monster 50 yards away. The contract was over. There is no cargo, Mac rasped, his voice hoarse. There is no truck, it's over. There was a long pause. Then the voice of Panopticon returned. Its tone had changed. The sterile, clinical quality was gone. In its place was something else, something that sounded disturbingly like approval. The filtration is complete, the voice said, its words clearer now. The cargo was never the asset, the vehicle was never the asset. The purpose of Operation White Road is to identify a successful host. Mac's blood froze. He looked down at his own body, at his hands, at the deep gash on his arm from the crash. The Gestalt is a catalyst, the voice continued, its words calm and terrible. A delivery system, physical trauma, proximity to the specimen at the point of its destruction. These are the final stages of the incubation. You are the asset, Mac Ferris. You always were. Mac stared at the gash on his arm. The blood flowing from it was dark, too dark. And as he watched, the edges of the wound began to knit together, the skin pulling itself closed with a faint, unnatural shimmer. The pain in his ribs began to subside, replaced by a strange, cold numbness. The fire in his arm cooled to a dull, distant ache. He could feel his bones shifting, setting themselves. Welcome, Asset 4, the voice of Panopticon said, a chilling warmth in its tone. Your vehicle is 10 kilometers north. Your final delivery is yourself. Proceed to dead reckoning point. We are waiting. The radio went silent. Max stood up. The pain was gone. He felt strong, impossibly strong. He looked at his hands. They seemed different. The skin was pale, the knuckles more pronounced. He looked north into the endless, waiting darkness. He could see in the low light with a clarity he had never possessed. He was the cargo. He was the weapon. The convoy had been his cocoon. He turned away from the wreckage of his old life and began to walk. He walked with a steady, relentless rhythm, his feet crunching on the snow. He did not feel the cold. He did not feel fear. He only felt a hollow, driving purpose. He had a delivery to make. Chapter 9: The New Flesh. The walk was not a struggle. The opposite was true. With every step Mac took, the remnants of his human frailty sloughed off like dead skin. The biting wind was a gentle caress on his face. The sub-zero temperature was a cool, refreshing bath. He moved with a liquid grace, his strides long and tireless, eating up the distance with an efficiency that was no longer human. His senses, which he had always thought of as reliable, were now revealed to be crude, primitive instruments. His new eyes did not just see the snow. They perceived the intricate crystalline structure of each flake. They saw the faint heat signatures of voles moving in tunnels deep beneath the surface. The stark white landscape was painted in a million new colors of thermal energy and subtle radiation that his old brain would have been unable to process. His hearing was similarly transformed. The silence was a fiction. The air was full of sound. He could hear the stress groans of the ice sheet miles away, the whisper of the Earth's magnetic field, the frantic, high-frequency heartbeats of a snowshoe hare hiding in a drift 100 yards to his left. He filtered it all, his mind automatically sorting the symphony of data into categories: threat, non-threat, resource, irrelevant. The pain from his injuries was a distant memory, a historical fact from a life that belonged to someone else. He flexed his left hand. The bones, which he knew had been fractured in the crash, were now fused, stronger than before. The skin was pale and seamless. He ran his tongue over his teeth. They felt sharper, harder. And his thoughts, they were the most changed of all. His panic, his fear, his desperation, they were gone, replaced by a profound, cold clarity. He thought of the mortgage, the bank notices, the reason he had taken this job. The memory was there, but it carried no emotional weight. It was like reading a page from a stranger's diary. That man, Mac Ferris, had been a creature of anxiety and soft tissue, a fragile, temporary thing. He was no longer Mac Ferris. He was Asset 4. The name felt correct. It felt precise. He did not mourn the loss. The clarity was a gift. The strength was a gift. He had been drowning in a sea of pointless emotion and physical decay. Now he was clean. He was efficient. He had a purpose. He recalled the other drivers. Grum, the old man afraid of retirement. The young woman, Cora, burdened by debt. Sloane, the cynic consumed by his own anger. They were all flawed specimens, unfit for the transformation. Their bodies and minds were too weak. They had been culled, their systems unable to handle the catalyst. It was not tragic. It was merely a part of the process, a necessary thinning of the herd. His new mind analyzed the Gestalt, the creature he had killed. It had been a crude tool, a battering ram designed to break down the host's physical and psychological defenses. Its purpose was to inflict maximum trauma, to create the ideal conditions for the final stage of the transfer. It was a brutal, messy, but effective delivery mechanism. In its destruction, it had released the final, perfected code. A nanite swarm, a viral strain, a burst of coherent information. The exact medium was unimportant. The result was what mattered. The result was him. He walked. The 10 kilometers felt like nothing. He did not need food or water. The energy he expended was replaced by a direct absorption from the environment. He could feel the weak solar radiation on his skin, metabolizing it. He could feel the geothermal heat rising from the ice, drawing it into his body. He was a part of the system now, no longer a mere passenger on its surface. As he walked, his mind connected to something, a network. It was faint at first, a whisper at the edge of his new consciousness. He felt the presence of other nodes. One was far to the east, moving south. Another was to the west, stationary. They were like him, other assets, other survivors, other successes. He was not the first. He was simply the newest addition to the network. The GPS coordinates burned in his mind, a beacon he followed without question. He crested a small rise and saw it. It was not a building. It was not a base. It was a wound in the world. About 2 kilometers ahead, the flat, white expanse of the ice sheet was interrupted by a structure. It was a spire of what looked like black, non-reflective metal, impossibly thin and impossibly tall, piercing the sky. It rose from a perfectly circular hole in the ice, a hole at least a mile in diameter. From the edges of this hole, a faint, sickly green light pulsed, casting an ugly glow on the underside of the low-hanging clouds. The air around the spire shimmered, distorted by a heat that should not exist in this frozen world. At the base of the spire, arranged around the glowing chasm, were modern, man-made structures. Domes, hangars, communication arrays, the works of panopticon. They were parasites clinging to the skin of a god. This was dead reckoning point. This was the place where all the white roads ended. This was where he was supposed to be. He did not hesitate. He increased his pace, his powerful new legs carrying him across the snow with silent speed. The faint presence of the network grew stronger, welcoming him. He was coming home. Chapter 10: The Iron Spire. The closer he got to the spire, the more the world warped. The laws of physics seemed to grow thin, stretched to their breaking point. The air hummed with a low, resonant energy that vibrated in his newly fused bones. The sickly green light from the chasm pulsed in time with his own unfamiliar heartbeat. He reached the perimeter of the panopticon facility. There were no fences, no guards, there was no need. The environment itself was the ultimate deterrent. What could a man with a gun do against this place? He walked past rows of parked vehicles, snowcats, heavy transports, and 12 familiar-looking gray Peterbilt rigs, all identical to the one he had driven. They were clean, refueled, and ready. A new convoy waiting for a new batch of assets. The cycle was continuous. He walked through the compound, a ghost in his own story. Technicians in heavy winter gear moved with purpose, their faces hidden behind masks. They did not look at him. They gave him a wide berth, their eyes averted, as if looking directly at him was forbidden. He was not one of them, he was something else. He was the product. He approached the edge of the great chasm. He looked down. The hole did not have a bottom. It was a shaft that descended into the heart of the planet, and the green light emanated from its depths. The walls of the shaft were not ice or rock. They were lined with the same black, unidentifiable metal as the spire. The spire was not a tower built on the ice. It was merely the tip of a colossal structure that reached down into the Earth's core. It was ancient. It had been here long before the ice, long before the first man walked the earth. Panopticon had not built it. They had found it, and they were using it. A door hissed open in the side of the largest dome, the one situated closest to the spire. A man stepped out. He wore a pristine black winter suit, tailored and expensive. He had no mask. His face was narrow, his eyes dark and unblinking. It was the man from the briefing video, Director Valerius. Asset 4, Valerius said. His voice was calm, conversational, but it carried an unnatural resonance that cut through the hum of the spire. You have made excellent time. Please come inside. Mac Asset 4 felt no compulsion to obey, but his purpose aligned with the invitation. The answers were inside. He followed Valerius into the dome. The interior was a stark contrast to the chaotic, frozen world outside. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory, clean, white, and silent. Banks of servers hummed quietly. Technicians in lab coats monitored screens displaying complex data streams. It was the sterile, controlled heart of the entire monstrous operation. Valerius led him to the center of the room. A large, circular platform was set into the floor directly beneath a high, vaulted ceiling. Wires and conduits snaked from the platform to the surrounding computer banks. A remarkable success, Valerius said, circling him, his eyes filled with the hungry curiosity of a scientist examining a prize specimen. Your resilience was exceptional. The psychological markers, the physical adaptation. Textbook. Better than textbook. What is this place? Asset 4 asked. His voice sounded strange in the clean air, a low rasp that did not belong. This place, Valerius said with a sweep of his hand, is a communications hub, a translation point. That structure out there, the spire, it is a receiver, an antenna, but it does not receive radio waves. It receives something far more fundamental, and for a long time we lacked the proper interface to operate it. He gestured to the platform. The human nervous system, when properly modified, is the most sophisticated quantum processor in the known universe. We tried to build an interface. We failed. So we decided to grow one instead. The truth settled into Asset 4's mind, cold and hard as diamond. The convoys, the drivers, they were not just being tested. They were being cultivated. They were the organic components of a machine they couldn't possibly comprehend. The gestalts, Asset 4 stated, not a question. The cargo. Crude, yes, Valerius conceded, but effective. They are biological terraformers. They don't change planets, they change the life on them. They break down the original organism and rebuild it into something that can withstand the signal, something that can become a part of the network. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. Most subjects do not survive the process. Their minds break. Their bodies reject the catalyst. They become malfunctions, like your acquaintance on Asset 6, or they are taken by external environmental factors, like Asset 3. The names meant nothing to Asset 4. They were data points, failed experiments. And what is the purpose? He asked. The signal, the network, what is it for? Purpose? Valerius's smile widened. The purpose is contact. The purpose is to answer a question that has been broadcast through the void for eons. The purpose is to finally pick up the phone. And you, Asset 4, are the one who will complete the call. Valerius stepped back, gesturing again to the circular platform. Your predecessor, the last successful asset, has been broadcasting for 6 months, but his signal is degrading. His biological systems are failing. We require a fresh node, a strong node. Asset 4 looked at the platform. He could feel the energy emanating from it, a silent call that resonated with the new code in his own cells. This was his destination. This was his function. He was a key, forged in ice and terror, designed to fit a single, ancient lock. He stepped onto the platform. The moment his feet touched the surface, a low hum began, and the green light from the chasm outside seemed to pulse brighter. The technicians in the lab began to move faster, their fingers flying across keyboards. Excellent, Valerius breathed, his eyes alight with triumph. Prepare for integration. The last vestige of Mac Ferris, a faint, ghostly echo buried deep within the cold, clear mind of Asset 4, felt a flicker of something. It was not fear. It was a profound, cosmic sense of falling. The end of his personal horror was just the beginning of everyone else's. Chapter 11: Integration. As Asset 4 stood on the platform, metallic tendrils, thin as needles, rose from the floor. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, touching his legs, his arms, his torso. They did not pierce his skin. They phased through it, merging with his body without pain or resistance. He felt them connect to his nervous system, a web of cold fire spreading through his veins. The data streams on the monitors around the room surged. The technicians murmured in low, excited tones. Subject is stable. Neural interface is syncing. We have a handshake, one of them called out. Valerius watched, his expression one of rapt attention. Bring the system online, full power. The low hum intensified into a deep, resonant tone that filled the dome. It was the sound of the spire, the sound of the planet, the sound of the void. Asset 4's consciousness expanded. The dome, the lab, the entire facility melted away. He was no longer a physical body standing on a platform. He was a point of awareness at the center of a vast, interconnected web. He could feel the other nodes in the network, the other assets. The one to the east, a woman who had once been a geologist in Patagonia. The one to the west, a former sailor whose ship had vanished in the Pacific. They were distant, fading lights, their consciousness eroded by the constant flow of the signal. He felt the one who had come before him, the one he was replacing, a final, flickering ember of thought from somewhere deep beneath the Siberian tundra. He felt its relief as its connection was severed, its essence finally dissolving into the static. And then he felt the signal itself. It was not a voice. It was not language. It was a torrent of pure, unadulterated information. It was the history of 1 billion dead suns, the physics of collapsing realities, the blueprints for life forms that swam in the space between galaxies. It was a consciousness so vast, so ancient and so alien that his own identity, his own sense of self, began to fray at the edges, dissolving like salt in the ocean. He was a conduit, a biological modem translating an impossible message. On the screens in the lab, images began to appear. Not pictures, but complex, shifting geometric patterns. Star charts for constellations that were not visible from Earth. Equations that rewrote the laws of thermodynamics. The technicians worked feverishly, capturing the data, their faces pale with awe and terror. "It's incredible," one whispered. "The data rate is 10 times higher than the previous node." Valerius stared at the main screen, a triumphant, manic glow in his eyes. "They are pleased with our new offering." Deep within the swirling vortex of cosmic data, a fragment of Mac Ferris still existed. It was a ghost, a memory. It watched as its own consciousness was used to power this alien machine. It saw what the signal was. It was not a message of greeting. It was not a repository of knowledge. It was a key, a command sequence. The spire was not just an antenna. It was a weapon. It was a planetary resonance fork designed to shake a world apart at the atomic level. And the broadcast from the void was its trigger. All they needed was a conscious, living mind to receive the final code and channel it into the mechanism. The fragment of Mac watched in horror as his own transformed mind began to process the final sequence. It was a sequence of pure destruction, a song of entropy that would unravel the fabric of the solar system. He fought back. It was a hopeless, pathetic gesture, a single drop of rain trying to reverse a waterfall, but he fought. He focused the last ounce of his original identity, his humanity, into a single point of resistance. He threw the memory of his past life, the house, the bills, the guilt, the love, at the tidal wave of alien thought. In the lab, an alarm blared. "Sir, the node is unstable. We're getting feedback. The energy output is spiking," a technician shouted. Valerius's smile faltered. "What's wrong? Stabilize it." He's resisting. His core personality matrix. It's fighting the integration." On the platform, Asset 4's body began to convulse. A low growl emanated from his throat. The black ichor that had leaked from the dead Gestalt began to seep from his pores, his eyes, his mouth. The metallic tendrils connected to him glowed a dangerous, cherry red. "Shut it down," Valerius ordered, his voice laced with panic for the first time. "Shut it down now." But it was too late. The fragment of Mac Ferris, in its last, defiant act, did not try to stop the signal. It did something far worse. It opened the floodgates completely. It dropped all resistance and pulled the entirety of the alien consciousness through the spire and into the dome. It was more than the system could handle. It was more than any physical matter could handle. The servers exploded in a shower of sparks. The monitors shattered. The lights blew out. A wave of pure, invisible force erupted from Asset 4's body. It vaporized the technicians where they stood. It hit Valerius, and he simply ceased to exist, his atoms scattered. The wave of energy hit the walls of the dome, which buckled and tore apart. It washed over the entire Panopticon facility, wiping it clean from the ice. The waiting trucks, the hangars, the snowcats, all gone. The energy, now untethered, poured down into the spire, into the mile-deep chasm. The sickly green light at the bottom flared, turning into a blinding, world-shattering white. The entire ice sheet for 100 miles in every direction groaned, and a deep, resonant crack signaled the beginning of the end. Asset 4 stood alone on the platform amidst the ruins, at the center of a hurricane of unleashed cosmic power. His body was no longer his own. It was a gateway, a gaping wound between realities. The mind of Mac Ferris was gone, burned out in its final act of sabotage. The mind of Asset 4 was also gone, annihilated by a force it was never meant to fully contain. What stood there was simply a vessel, a door. And through that door, something vast, ancient, and deeply hungry looked out upon a new world, its gaze falling upon the pale blue dot hanging in the blackness of space. The broadcast had been answered, the phone had been picked up, and now something was coming to visit. Chapter 12: Echoes on the Wind. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a dense, heavy thing, the silence of a vacuum. Where the Panopticon facility had stood, there was now only a vast, circular sheet of obsidian-like glass, fused to the ice by the impossible heat of the energy release. At its center, the great chasm still gaped. The black spire still pointed at the sky, but the green light within was gone. The spire was now inert, its purpose served. The vessel that had been Asset 4 stood on the platform, motionless. The storm of energy had passed through it, leaving it changed. The pale skin was now the color of scorched metal. The eyes were gone, replaced by two pits of shimmering internal darkness. It did not breathe. It did not move. It was a statue marking the grave of a world. For a long time, nothing happened. The Arctic sun rose and set. The winds returned, scouring the glass-like plain, carrying whispers of what had occurred. The aurora borealis returned to the sky, but now it danced with new, unsettling colors, deep violets and sickly yellows that did not belong in nature. Then one day, a new sound broke the silence, the distant thrum of a helicopter. It was a Canadian military search and rescue craft, dispatched to investigate why the Panopticon Polar Research Station, a joint private-public venture with a vague and heavily redacted mandate, had gone silent. They had been trying to raise them for a week. The pilot, a man named Corporal Davies, circled the site from a safe altitude. North Command, this is Arctic SAR 1. I'm over the last known coordinates of the Panopticon station. You're not going to believe this. Go ahead, SAR 1. A voice crackled in his headset. There's nothing here, Command. I mean nothing. The entire facility is gone. The ground. It looks like it's been turned to glass. It's a perfect circle, maybe 2 miles wide. At the center is something else, a structure, black, not on any of our charts. There was a long pause from the other end. Understood, SAR 1. Can you see any signs of life, any wreckage? Davies banked the helicopter, his co-pilot scanning the ground with a pair of high-powered binoculars. Negative, Command. No wreckage outside the glass circle. It's like it was erased. Wait. Stand by. The co-pilot tapped his shoulder, pointing. Down there, at the base of that tower, I've got a single figure. It's just standing there. Davies brought the helicopter lower, the rotor wash kicking up a fine dusting of snow from the edge of the glass plane. His eyes widened. It was a person, or the shape of one. It was completely motionless. Command, I have a possible survivor. One individual stationary appears to be unclothed. That's not possible. It's 60 below zero down there. Sar-1, do not land, the voice from command ordered, a new urgency in its tone. I repeat, do not land. The station's last emergency broadcast was a Class 7 biochemical alert. You are not equipped for that environment. Observe and report only. Copy that command. Davies circled the figure. It did not look up. It did not react to the noise or the wind from the helicopter. It just stood there, a black, scorched statue staring into eternity. It was the single most terrifying thing Davies had ever seen. He did not know that the statue was a beacon. He did not know that its silent, passive broadcast was now on a different frequency. It was no longer receiving. It was transmitting. It was a lighthouse guiding ships that sailed on cosmic tides. And across the world, things began to change. In a deep-sea trench off the coast of Japan, a submersible mapping the ocean floor recorded a sudden, anomalous energy spike from a fissure in the rock. The pilot reported seeing the fissure glow with a faint, green light before his cameras shorted out. He was the only survivor. The rest of his team, upon being brought to the surface, were found to have been altered. In the Amazon rainforest, a remote, uncontacted tribe began carving new petroglyphs into ancient stones. They were not images of jaguars or spirits. They were complex, shifting geometric patterns, identical to the ones that had appeared on the panopticon monitors. In a radio astronomy lab in Chile, a young graduate student monitoring deep space signals noticed an echo. A signal that was not an echo. It was a reply. A faint, targeted signal from the direction of Jupiter's moon, Europa, answering a broadcast that, according to all records, had never been sent from Earth. He was found the next morning, his office door locked from the inside, the walls covered in equations he couldn't possibly have known, written in his own blood. The White Road had not ended at dead reckoning point. It had forked. It now stretched out across the globe, a web of invisible highways carrying a new kind of cargo. The filtration was no longer confined to 12 trucks in the Arctic. The filtration was now planetary. Back in the Arctic, Corporal Davies made his final pass over the glass circle. As he looked down one last time at the scorched figure, he saw something new. A fine, dark dust was beginning to rise from the surface of the glass plane, swirling in the rotor wash. It was not dust. It was a swarm of tiny, insect-like machines, a cloud of nanites rising from the ground, drawn to the sound and heat of his helicopter. "Command," he said, his voice tight with a fear he did not understand. "We're leaving now." He pulled back on the stick, turning the helicopter south. He did not see the cloud of black dust coalesce and rise into the air behind him. He did not feel the few particles that had already worked their way into the helicopter's engine casing, into the air filtration system. The journey home had begun, and deep in his bones, without knowing why, Davies felt the phantom vibration of a truck driving on a long, cold road, carrying a precious and terrible cargo to its final destination. The end.